Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
On January 4th, 1999, a historic blizzard swept through the upper Midwest, burying entire towns under more than 3 feet of snow. It was a whiteout so severe that visibility dropped to nothing within minutes. Roads vanished, trees bowed and snapped under the weight of ice, and the wind howled with a voice that didn't sound natural. People huddled in their homes, power lines snapped, and emergency services became unreachable. Most who survived that blizzard have chilling stories to tell, but few are as disturbing as what happened to Dylan Mercer and his 3 friends. Dylan was a 22-year-old college dropout who had recently moved back in with his parents in a small rural town in North Dakota. He wasn't thrilled about it, but he had a close group of friends, Eli, Marcus, and Jamie, who convinced him to take a short trip up to Marcus's family's remote hunting cabin before the storm hit. The plan was to drink, smoke, and wait out the snow in isolation. They brought supplies for 3 days, even though Marcus assured them they'd be back before the worst of it started. They arrived at the cabin just after sunset. The place was simple, 1 story, surrounded by woods and miles from any cell reception. The sky had already begun to spit light snow, and the wind was steadily growing stronger. The moment they walked in, Jamie, always the quiet one, said she didn't like how the place felt. "It's like it's been waiting," she mumbled. The others laughed it off. The first night was uneventful. They drank, played cards, and fell asleep to the sound of wind scraping the trees. But at around 3 a.m., Marcus woke up to a loud banging, 3 solid knocks on the front door. He assumed it was one of the others messing around, but when he opened the door, no one was there, just swirling snow and the eerie sound of something moving through the trees. Not the wind, something else. By morning, the storm had escalated beyond anything they'd expected. Snow piled against the windows, and their truck was completely buried. The power went out just after breakfast, and temperatures inside began to drop fast. Then they found the footprints. Fresh tracks in the snow led from the tree line to the front door. Barefoot prints, human. No shoes, no socks, just 5-toed impressions heading toward the cabin, but no prints leading away. That same day, Jamie started whispering to herself. She kept staring at the fireplace, even though it was unlit. She said she could hear someone inside the chimney whispering back. "He's in the flue," she said at one point, dead serious. "He's watching us." That night, they heard the knocking again. This time it came from the back of the cabin, then the side, then the roof. Always 3 knocks, spaced evenly like a code. They took turns staying up, but no one ever saw anything. And Jamie got worse. She wouldn't eat. She stood near the door for hours, listening. She started saying things in a low voice, things that made no sense. The snow doesn't cover the old blood, and he hates the heat. That's why the fire's out. On the 3rd night, Eli disappeared. They woke to find the front door wide open, snow blowing inside, and Eli's boots still by the fire. No prints let out, just wind-blown snow and the same 3-toed impressions now circling the cabin. They searched in vain, screaming his name, but the storm swallowed every sound. That night, Jamie sat in the corner, rocking and repeating, "He's almost in." They boarded up the chimney, blocked the windows, and tried to keep the last of their body heat inside. But Marcus began hearing things too. At first, it was his name being whispered from under the floorboards, then tapping from inside the walls. They tore into the paneling looking for rats or pipes. They found neither, just darkness, hollow, cold darkness, and a faint, rotten smell. By the 5th day, Dylan had enough. The storm had eased slightly, and he decided to try for help. Marcus refused to leave. Jamie didn't speak at all anymore. She just sat facing the boarded-up chimney, humming what sounded like a lullaby. Dylan set off on foot, pushing through waist-high snowdrifts. He walked for over 2 hours before spotting a highway and flagging down a snowplow. He was delirious from cold and exhaustion, but managed to tell the driver everything. Rescue teams reached the cabin by nightfall. They found Marcus dead, frozen in place, hunched in the corner, eyes wide open in terror. Jamie was gone, just gone. No sign of forced entry, no blood, no tracks. But something was off. The boards over the chimney had been ripped off from the inside. To this day, no one knows what really happened in that cabin. Eli and Jamie were never found. Marcus's death was ruled hypothermia, but Dylan swears it wasn't the cold that killed him. He says sometimes in the dead of winter, when the snow piles against his windows and the wind howls just right, he hears 3 slow knocks, always from different parts of the house. He's moved 5 times. The knocking always follows, and he never ever lights the fireplace.
Story number 2.
In February 2007, a freak blizzard slammed into a stretch of rural Montana without warning. It wasn't just the snow or the wind, it was the speed. Within 2 hours, what started as light flurries turned into a white wall of death. Highways shut down, power lines snapped, and even snowplows had to retreat. Most people stayed indoors. But a search and rescue report buried in local archives tells a story that still sends chills through the handful who know it. A father and daughter, Warren Hargrove and his 14-year-old daughter, Ellie, were driving back from a weekend ski trip when the storm hit. They were halfway through a long, empty stretch of Route 87, bordered by dense forest and crumbling barbed wire fencing. Warren pulled off the road when visibility dropped to nothing, parking in front of what looked like an abandoned ranger station, a squat, boarded-up building almost buried in snow. They had no cell signal and no way to drive forward. They decided to wait inside. The front door wasn't locked. The inside was stripped down, empty, except for some dusty chairs and a half-burned stove in the corner. The place looked untouched for years, but there was no sign of animals or other squatters. Just emptiness and, oddly, a thick layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed, except for what looked like drag marks leading from the entrance down the hall. At first, they thought it must have been an old animal trail, but the marks ended in front of a closet door that refused to open. Warren tried prying it with a knife, but it wouldn't budge. That night, they huddled in sleeping bags near the stove, trying to keep warm. Outside, the wind screamed so loud it felt alive. Around 2 a.m., Ellie shook her father awake. She said someone had been walking through the hallway, slow and heavy. Warren checked every room. Nothing. No footprints in the dust. Nothing outside but white. They tried to go back to sleep. Minutes later, Ellie sat bolt upright and said, "There's something inside the walls." They both heard it this time. A low, slow scraping, like claws or fingernails dragging along wood. It circled the room. They stood in silence, holding their breath. Then, 3 knocks from inside the closet door. Warren grabbed a chair and jammed it against the knob. The knocking didn't stop. It kept going, steady, slow, rhythmic. Ellie started to cry. Warren held her close until morning. The sound didn't stop until just before dawn. As soon as the sun came up, they grabbed their bags and ran through knee-deep snow back to the highway. A snowplow eventually spotted them. They never said much about what happened. But 2 weeks later, Warren returned with a police officer to retrieve the car. When they entered the station, it looked the same, except the closet door now stood wide open. Inside, they found a staircase, narrow, steep, leading down, far below what should have been possible in that building's foundation. Warren refused to go near it. The officer took one look, muttered something about unstable architecture, and left it at that. The station was sealed off by county order weeks later, demolished in the spring. Locals say that during heavy blizzards, if you're unlucky enough to be stuck near that stretch of Route 87, you might still see a strange shape standing in the white, too tall, too thin, and not quite human. Just standing there, barely visible, until the snow covers it again. And if you ever find yourself inside an old building in a whiteout, listen closely. If you hear something scraping along the walls or 3 soft knocks from behind a sealed door, don't answer it. Don't open anything. Just run. Because whatever it is, it's been waiting.
Story number 3.
In December 2011, a group of winter hikers disappeared in the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming during what authorities described as a sudden, extreme weather anomaly. The group, 5 experienced trekkers in their late 20s, had planned a 4-day snowshoeing trip. They checked in with park rangers, followed all safety protocols, and were equipped with GPS, emergency beacons, and satellite phones. But by day 3, all communication ceased. When the rescue team finally located their last known coordinates 6 days later, they didn't find the group. They found their gear, neatly stacked, perfectly dry, and completely untouched by snow, despite 5 straight days of blizzards. The rescue team was baffled. The snow was over 4 feet deep everywhere except for a precise circle, about 20 feet wide, where the group's backpacks, boots, sleeping bags, and gear were all laid out like a campsite. Except there was no fire, no tracks, not even disturbed snow where someone might have walked. It was like the snow had simply avoided the area. The search continued for another 2 weeks. No bodies were recovered, no signs of distress. Until one morning, one of the park rangers on patrol, Andre Simmons, failed to check in. His partner reported they had split up for only 10 minutes to cover more ground. 10 minutes. Andre's last radio transmission was strange. "They're under the ice. I can see their faces. Oh God, they're smiling." When they retraced his path, they found his snowshoes and parka lying at the edge of a frozen stream. No footprints, no sign of a struggle. But in the ice below, searchers swore they saw something. 5 vague humanoid shapes distorted beneath the frozen surface. Their mouths stretched wide, too wide, grinning. The shapes were gone the next day. No one talks about what might have melted them. Weeks later, Andre's journal was discovered in a waterproof pouch tucked into a tree trunk, a mile from the site. The last entry read, "It doesn't like heat. It lives in the cold. It wears your voice. It wears your face. If you hear someone calling you by name in the snow, even if it sounds like someone you love, don't answer. If you see footprints forming in front of you, don't follow them. And if it finds you, don't let it smile." The forest has been open to the public ever since, but hikers are repeatedly warned not to venture off trail during snowfall, no matter how light. Rangers won't say why. Some locals think it's superstition. Others have heard the stories about people vanishing, about radios picking up faint laughter, about hikers seeing their own reflections standing up and waving from inside the ice. And every few years after the first major snowfall, someone finds another perfect circle in the woods, no snow inside it. No tracks leading in or out, just silence, and sometimes a smile carved into a tree.